I want to take some time today and do all I can, at least with a male voice, and then you're going to have a female voice, two of them here in a little bit, to encourage every woman in this room. It's Mother's Day, and some of you are moms and some of you aren't. Some of you will be, some of you may not be. But I want to encourage you, and I want you to see from the scriptures how incredibly gifted, valuable, and important that you are. And I think sometimes you don't hear that, and you don't hear it enough. So I want to do that today. Now, there's a couple of verses in the scriptures that have at times I hear men taking them out of context. In other words, I've heard some men, who'll say, well, the man's the head of the household, or a woman's supposed to submit. And it's in the book, but you've got to look at what comes before and after it, Like on the whole submit thing, it starts out, submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. Some of the guys seem to forget that one. And then after it, it says, by the way, men, love your wife like Christ loved the church, which basically means to die for her. So I think you got to factor that in. So ladies, I found a wise mother who really could address this, a guy that's going to, honestly, a guy that's got to say, I'm the head of the household, probably needs therapy anyway. He needs some help. But anyway, I want you to meet a wife who has a husband like that, and she makes an incredible point. Ladies, I'd get something out to write this down if I were you. If you don't get it, you can go to the website later and get it, because this is an important statement. Every woman, if you're ever going to have anything to do with a man somewhere in your life, you need to hear what this mom has to say. Have a look at the screens.
Come on, don't you worry. I'm going to talk to him.
My dad is so stubborn. What he says goes. The man is the head of the house.
Let me tell you something, Tula. The man is the head, but the woman is the neck. And she can turn the head any way she wants.
So there you go. I hope you all got that written down. And if any guy ever plays that head of the household thing on you, just remind him that you're the neck and you can take that head wherever you want it to go. So I thought you needed to see that. Let me tell you what it says in the Old Testament. I'm going to give you a little glimpse of the Old Testament, a little glimpse of the New. And then I want you to hear a woman's voice on this, which is really better than even my voice. So we'll get to that in a second. If you want to write this down, in the Old Testament, starting out at the very beginning of time, in the Old Testament, here's the truth about every woman in this room. She's equal with the male. If you want to fill this in, I think it'll come up here on the screen. And we'll leave that there for just a second. She is equal with the male. She is the bearer of divine image and equally blessed by God. Now, we'll hold that up there for just a second. Equal with the male, bearer of divine image, blessed by God. In other words, equal with the male. God said in Genesis chapter, this goes all the way back to the very beginning. In Genesis chapter 1, right at the beginning, God says, let us make man, and he didn't mean just the man Adam. He said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness. And here's where we get the first clue. And let them rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, the livestock, over all the earth, over all the creatures that move along the ground. He did not say, let him rule. He said, let them rule. So she's equal with the male, and then the bearer of divine image. That's the next one. The bearer of divine image. And here's what it says in verse 27 of Genesis 1. In the image of God, male and female, he created them. Okay? So, women, you are equal with the male. You are the bearer of divine image. And then the third step there, it says equally blessed by God. You are equally blessed by God. Continuing on in Genesis, verse 28, it says God blessed them and said to them. You get that? It didn't say, and God blessed him and said to him, you rule. No. You are equally blessed by God because it says God blessed them both equally. And then the sentence goes on to say this. Not only is she equal with the male, the bearer of divine image, equally blessed by God, equally charged with responsibility, and given a significant role. Those last two. Equally charged with responsibility, given a significant role. Equally charged. Again, he said to them, you both rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and all that has been created. All right? Equally charged with responsibility, and then given a significant role. Now, let me give you a little bit more glimpse in this role that she was given right off at the beginning. In verse 18 of chapter 2 in Genesis, God says, I've got to make a suitable helper for him, for Adam, a suitable helper. Now, if you take that and let's go back and see what perhaps all the way back into the Hebrew, what was originally meant there. Listen to what this, let me just read to you what I came across. God set out to provide Adam with what he needed most, a suitable helper. None of the animals, of course, was suitable for Adam since they were not created in God's image. They could not help him preserve the image. Therefore, God custom designed Adam's female equivalent, in whom Adam immediately recognized as one just like himself. Now here's where it gets good. The word helper is used to describe, and God uses the word helper as the role of this woman. The word helper is used to describe the woman's place, and it's very significant. You see, in biblical scholarship, the Hebrew word for helper is used in the Bible as a designation for someone who rescues or saves from difficult situations. That's what a helper does. Remember, there's times in Scripture that we read, sometimes in the Psalms, I think, or that God is our helper. So the same word is used. The woman is going to be Adam's helper. So like we all need God, the man needs the woman, the helper. And that means someone who rescues or saves from difficult situations, someone who walks alongside and completes this equal relationship that God has made. So I think in this light, the part played by the woman in Adam's life gets very clear. She was the God-appointed rescuer who would help preserve the divine image in human life. She was not intended ever to be a subordinate assistant. So she is given a significant role. Now the scriptures go on. I could spend a lot of time that I don't want to spend right now back in the Old Testament. Moses had a sister. Her name was Miriam. We're told in Exodus 15 that after the children of Israel crossed the Red Sea, it was Miriam who led everybody in worship. Okay? On the stage, leading everybody in worship. Micah would later, in the book of Micah 6:4, Micah considered Miriam a leader at the same level of Moses and Aaron. Judges chapter 4, God chose Deborah to be the judicial spiritual leader of Israel. So there's just a glimpse of how things were in the Old Testament when God put this whole thing together. Now, things didn't continue to go well. By the time Jesus comes along, things are pretty much completely distorted and out of control, and women have very few rights, and they're kind of held under this thumb by the religious leaders and by society. You didn't get a chance to get an education unless you were wealthy, and even then a wealthy family could maybe hope that their daughter could get an education, but it was rare, but it did happen, and I'll give you some examples in a moment. So here's what she is in the New Testament, though. If you follow Jesus, and that's what we're doing, so here's what she is in the New Testament. You're going to write this down. She's a dynamic leader. She's a dynamic leader who is used by God to build his church. You know, I couldn't help but thinking this morning, Kim kind of referred to this in the chapel service. We're talking about used by God to build his church. This church started, the vision for this church 52 years ago was put into the heart and mind of a lady that worked for an oil company here in town. And she knew about an empty church building that this oil company owned, and she said, I think I know some people who might be willing to start a church. She was the one with the idea. She was the one that sort of paved the way. Another lady, this guy's business partner at the oil company, a woman, comes along and says, I will help fund it. We wouldn't be here today if it weren't for those two women. I'd never really even put that together. Never really stopped and thought about how God used those two in the early idea phase of this very church. So she's a dynamic leader who is used by God to build his church, to lead people to Jesus. That's who you are, women in Christ, to lead people to Jesus, to set an example of what a leader and what a woman can be. And you're entrusted by Jesus with some of the most profound truths of his time on this earth. At Pentecost, Peter's preaching this great sermon. And Peter quotes the prophet Joel. And he says, this is in Acts 2:17 where Peter quotes Joel, and he reminds them that God had said to the prophet Joel, your sons and your daughters will prophesy. And you talk to some people in church circles, you would think that would just have said your sons will prophesy, but not your daughters, not women. It's not true. Clearly, the prophet in the Old Testament, and Peter echoes it in the New Testament, says your sons and your daughters, because they are equal, male and female. They're bare of divine image. They're equally blessed by God. They're equally charged with responsibility, and they're given significant role. Your sons and your daughters will prophesy. It was women who paved so much of the way for Jesus and his ministry, who provided financial support, who traveled along with him. The woman at the well, one of my favorite stories in the Bible. She was one of the first people to proclaim Jesus as Messiah to the Samaritans. Is that not amazing? You know, that starts out with this woman who's ashamed and feels worthless. And what does she become? By the end of that chapter, one day transformation. The end of that chapter, they're saying, and many in that town came to believe in him because of this woman's testimony. Isn't that amazing how God used her to get a message to the Samaritans that they had to that point either resisted or not been willing to listen to? So we see women who supported and traveled with Jesus. Women we know a couple weeks ago on Easter were the first